Not all wounds show. Neither do they leave obvious scars nor cut through the skin. Rather, they whisper, softly finding their place in the silence of what was never said, never given, never arrived. These are the wounds of absence, not the suffering of something that happened, but rather the ache of what never happened. The eminent psychologist Jung once said that a mother is an archetype rather than only a person. A psychic basis laid right at the beginning of life. Her presence defines our first encounters of identity, love, and safety. We learn whether we are worthy from her eyes, and from her touch we know whether the world is safe. But what results when that presence disappears? When the mother either subtly or overtly disappears? A child can grow up feeling emotionally orphaned in innumerable ways, even if she is physically present. Though you could not really reach this figure, the presence was there like a shadow. You adjusted then. You turned into the decent youngster, the resilient one, the quiet observer. You discovered how to live without too much asking. But inside, a terrible question reverberated, influencing every relationship, every sense of value. Was I ever enough? Adults rarely label this suffering exactly. We refer to it as perfectionism. We refer to that as emotional burnout. We call it fear of intimacy or trust problems. Benevolent under all of this, though, is the silent child who discovered that tenderness earned, love was conditional, and presence could disappear without notice. It's ancestral rather than only personal. Like an invisible heirloom, this mother wound is passed on unspoken but profoundly felt. Jung once said that from the shadows, what stays unconscious guides us. For many of us, the lack of a mother becomes a roadmap for all we worry about, all we pursue. You are not flawed. You are repeating. And echoes are invitations to listen, to remember, and to go back, not a weakness. To yourself, not to the mother you lost. Healing starts when you learn to be the mother to yourself. It does not start in search of the mother you never had. Everything changes that holy moment when you stop wondering if you were ever sufficient to be loved and start learning how to love yourself without conditions. But let's stop here for a moment. Imagine a child who grew up without the solace of a mother's hug, missing not only affection. They have no center, no psychic cover. The mother is the archetype of holding, of home in Jungian psychology. She is the first yes the child should get. You matter. You belong. When that is lacking, the child's world loses ground and drifts in emptiness and confusion. Growing up without this kind of consistency feels how? Living in a house surrounded by people yet feeling invisible, unloved, and abandoned by the very one who ought to have been your cornerstone? It haunts silently in the silence of every day, not screams. Those who carry this wound sometimes say, I don't remember much of my childhood as adults, but the body remembers. There is memory in the nervous system. Relationships get complicated, intimacy feels alien, and love, when it does finally show up, seems like a language you learnt too late. This is the invisible wound, the silent grief you carry about with you everywhere you go that nobody else can see. The motherless child can develop to be praised for their independence, emotional fortitude, and tenacity. But this is not a natural ability, armor indeed. And under it sits a hunger for a gentle, pure, safe love. The world might commend your skill, but what they do not see is that it is all a well-crafted defense. The fact that this wound sometimes resides in seemingly perfectly functioning families adds to its complexity. Food, clothes, a pulse to life. But what was lacking was the emotional attunement. Without that soulful look that says, I see you, not for what you do, but simply for who you are, the youngster learns to perform for love, and performance turns into a prison. Imagine being that young child trying to get love that ought to have been freely given. Growing up in a house where the mother was physically present but emotionally absent, exhausted, overwhelmed, or perhaps just too burdened by her own suffering. The real absence started to show up in those times when you tiptoed around the house wondering if you could ever be enough. Jung described the mother as the first mirror the self used. A child's ego cannot totally develop without her reflection. Rather, the child grows with the terrible question, "Who am I if no one ever really saw me?" That question permeates relationships, successes, and the quiet loneliness that never really goes away in their life. You might not term it trauma. You label it as the strong one, the low maintenance, the one who never needs anything. But survival-born strength is not peace. It is armor. And under that armor is a self just ready to be born. The fact that this wound is sometimes concealed behind the surface of a working family is most tragic. Although the mother may have been physically present, emotionally she lacked warmth, no real nurturing. Growing up looking for that connection in others, the child constantly wonders if they will ever be really seen or loved. Images cannot capture this quiet grief. It does not acquire sympathy cards. Still, it shapes every facet of your life. It makes you too independent, always lending assistance to others, yet you secretly want someone to support you. You start taking care, hoping that maybe if you give enough, someone will respond in the manner you have always yearned for. The world honors your selflessness and fortitude. But under your resiliency, they fail to see the grief that has never found expression. The loss concerned a possibility rather than a person. The prospect of a mother who would have seen you not for what you could do, but for just being you, who would have loved you unconditionally. That is the injury forming your identity, and you started life not as the strong one. You started to survive like that. You molded yourself around the silence, around the absence, around the sites where love ought to have found home but never did. Actually, though, this loss is not a sign of weakness. It is holy. It suggests that your soul still remembers what love ought to have felt like, and there is the secret to healing in that memory. Your decisions, your boundaries, and your relationships will continue to be shaped by that loss until you name it. But once you name it, once you admit the suffering of what was never given, the silence starts to clear. Finding what was lost does not bring healing. It results from loving you the way you never experienced. And that, dear friends, marks the beginning of the actual metamorphosis. Some wounds neither show obvious marks on the skin or even feel in the body. Rather, they settle silently, invisible, where nobody can find them. These are the wounds of absence, the ache from what never happened rather than from what happened, and they simply get more buried as long as we ignore them. The hard fact is that we lose sight of our actual selves when we link our identity to the expectations of others. We start to play roles to satisfy needs we have never addressed, so becoming shadows of who we truly are. Eventually, though, these roles seem so familiar that we cannot distinguish between who we were and who we have evolved into. You tell yourself, "This is just who I am." But it's who you grew to survive a love that was erratic, inconsistent, or absent. According to Jung's wisdom, these unquestioned wounds linger in our unconscious mind and are ready for healing. They do not only live in the past, they inherited rather than merely personal. Transmitted through the years, they find expression in our love, our attachment, and our search for safety. Love seems threatening more the longer we carry these patterns, because someone might touch the wound you have buried for so long when they at last see the real you, not your achievements or strength, but you, the one you have been covering for a lifetime. But suppose your true identity is not the wound. What would happen if the mask you don is not really who you are? Jung asks us to remember what it shielded rather than to tear off the layers, so destroying what kept us alive. Healing is recovering the person you lost along the road, not rejecting who you grew to be. The need for love does not vanish after a childhood molded by emotional absence. It settles underground. Though a part of you still searches, you grow up. Not deliberately, but in your patterns, relationships, decisions you take. Unknowingly, you begin to search for the love you were denied in places where it does not exist. Emotionally distant partners, the ones who need saving, those who demand labor before love. You start to identify with people who can only provide fleeting flashes of love, and ultimately you feel abandoned once more. Explain why. Expecting others to heal a pain they never caused, you have been unintentionally projecting that unhealed mother wound onto others. No matter how much you try to correct this pattern, it will recur. Every time you meet someone who feels like home, until they don't. The same ache returns, feeling too much, too deprived, too sensitive. The withdrawal, the letdown, the uncertainty, the child in you is waiting for someone who never will arrive at the door. This is about trying to heal an old wound through present-day people, not about being broken. Still, healing cannot come from others. That comes from within. Jung referred to this phenomena as projection. That is, the unconscious wound projected onto others, hoping they would complete the story never finished. Nobody can, however, replace what never was received. Nobody can occupy the area the mother ought to have occupied. This is the breaking point, that point when you start to question why your relationships follow the same emotional script and why you keep choosing the wrong people. Why does love seem, rather than a haven, like a performance? The answer has to do with who you have been unconsciously looking for all along, not with who you love. You are not a needy person, you remember. You are not broken. You are repeating a suffering never seen. And it will keep repeating itself like an unbounded cycle as long as you keep projecting that suffering onto others. But suppose you could stop that cycle. Healing starts the moment you raise the unconscious to attention. It's about realizing your expectations for what they are. That of attempts to go back to a love never experienced. And everything changes when you come to see this. You stop running after. You begin to weep. You start to pay attention to the part of you awaiting years to be claimed by your own presence. Finding someone else does not mark the end of your search for love. It ends when you at last go back to yourself. Usually, this quiet moment of insight occurs midway through a regular day. You stop asking, "Why did she not love me the way I needed?" and begin to wonder, "How can I love myself now in the ways I was once denied?" It is not easy to make this change. Radical. Nevertheless, it's holy. Healing is recovering what was lost by means of becoming the one who breaks the cycle rather than by recurrence of the trauma. It is not about closing yourself off in defense or hardening your heart. It's about going back to the part of you still waiting for appreciation rather than for a rescuer. That someone is you. You should never have had to carry this, but now I'm here and I won't abandon you again. This is the soul's rite of passage into sovereignty, not into bitterness or into blame, into an inner adulthood marked by, "I choose now to face this pain, even though I did not choose it. I choose to hold myself in all the ways I was never held." You are not the lost child anymore. It was you that came back. It is you who decided to confront what generations before yours avoided. And you stop looking for someone to save you at that same moment. You start to sense it, a subdued presence growing from inside. That is not the mother you missed. It is the self you discovered. And the healing starts at that point. Most people do not understand healing. It is not about pretending the suffering never existed or moving on. Real healing starts when we go toward the neglected aspects of ourselves. The child inside who learned to go without. The one who curled up in silence. The one who believed that need was weakness. Actually, this child never vanished. She only learnt to hide in order to keep safe. Remothering is not about passing for a wound not occurring. It's about sitting with the bits of you that had to grow up too quickly, acknowledging it and saying, I see you, I know what you've been through, and I'm here now. It's letting the tears flow without guilt and letting the terror surface without trying to suppress it. Something ancient starts to soften in that still, vulnerable moment. Healing does not always have great drama. Sometimes the little daily deeds count. Deciding to relax free from guilt. Declaring no without having to justify. Taking care of your body out of respect rather than out of guilt. Looking in the mirror and telling yourself, oh, you are worthy, you are enough, you are safe now. These are not little deeds. These are deeds of inner revolution. First of all, this work can be unpleasant. Taking care of yourself with dedication sometimes brings back the anguish of how long you went without it. There is a grief for all the years spent searching for love in all the wrong places when you at last give yourself what you were once denied. But this depression is release rather than weakness. Your soul is at last releasing what no longer has to be carried. Jung understood that change was not about rewriting history. It had to do with merging it. Though it still hurts, it doesn't define you anymore. Healing isn't about pushing yourself into something you're not. It's about reconnecting with the bits of yourself you neglected. The child who once yearned for love now gets it from you. Gently, regularly, enough to restore the safety once broken. This work is not about developing egotistical behavior. It has to do with developing self-honesty. It's about learning to mother your emotions with presence, to clearly defend your boundaries, to foster your dreams with support rather than judgment. A quiet truth surfaces as the inner critic softens and the fear of abandonment withers away. You were never unlovable. You were simply unloved in the manner you needed. Though the world might never show the mother you yearned for, you can be the mirror reflecting love, consistency, and value to your inner life. By doing this, you free the adult you are growing to be rather than only heal the child inside. Because the deepest healing never comes when someone else at last chooses you. It starts with your choosing yourself, fully, angrily, without condition. For many of us, the absence of the mother has silently shaped that fate. Not with great pain, but with quiet patterns, with stories told in silence, with decisions made in the shadow of longing. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." But right now you see it. You see the wound as a call, not as a flaw, not something to hide, but rather something to grasp. Under such knowledge, the narrative starts to change. You cannot heal by pretending the suffering never happened. You heal by realizing you survived the absence. You find that something inside you stayed broken even though nobody came to hold you. Your healing started all along that part of you, that which kept breathing, loving, and hoping. This road never has been about assigning blame to anyone. It has always been about releasing yourself from the roles you inherited, from unconscious loyalties, from the conviction that your value has to be acquired. Healing is not about returning to rework the past. It's about recovering the pen and selecting the narrative you'll live forward from. You are no child waiting for love to show up. The one loving the child within of you is you. You are the one who decides what to do next and who notes what was absent. You cannot alter the past. You can, however, reconcile things with it. You are not limited in growth. You can let it mold you, not as a prison, but as a road back to yourself. Should something in this message inspire you, kindly let the comments reflect your voice. Have you come into that soul whose presence feels like home? Alternatively, are you still returning to yourself along the hallowed path? Though incomplete, your story might become the lighthouse someone else is looking for, the very sign they were unaware they were seeking. Share this video with someone close to you if they are experiencing the belief that love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that they are unworthy of peace. Help me get those who need to know that true love does not demand we shrink. Real connection does not demand soul sacrifice. The most important union we will ever create is that with our own inner truth. I invite you to subscribe and turn on the notification bell before you leave. Here we travel beneath the surface, investigate the hidden architecture of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and how each relationship is a mirror reflecting our own growth. Leave a theme, a question, or a wound you would want us to investigate below future videos. You are the reason this space breathes. Your voice is not only welcome but also absolutely necessary. Not only for this video but also for your inner work, that of the holy labor of remembering who you really are. And always keep in mind, your soul will know, not from anxiety but from peace, when the right person shows up. Let your most close relationship to be the one you grow within until that point. That defines it. The home is that. From that wholeness, all things real birth. I will be on the road until next time.